All right, it's our project time. So this is the time we implement the changes that we are going to use for the rest of the course. So I like to do these because it gives you an idea of what you would set up out in the real world. Now, of course, depending on what our situation is, we may use any one of these items. But what would typically be the setup? Well, that's what we're going to set up on our switch, and I'll step you through that process. Now, what I would do in these situations is make sure my configurations are saved, and then I would grab a copy of the configurations, so just in case I can fall back to that. And I've also got my changes that I want to implement here on the right-hand side, and I'll step you through the process of what I'm going to do. And then at the end of this, I'll test out all my configurations and then make sure that I have a copy of the most up-to-date copy of the configs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out by getting into the global configuration mode. So I'm going to do that first. And then I've got all these IP exclude address. So I'll exclude all the addresses that we're going to exclude, and then I'll set up the DHCP pool. So this is all setting up for the IP version 4 version of DHCP. Now, one thing you'll notice is I don't have VLAN 10 specified here. And I keep VLAN 10 as kind of a protected network. It's a management network, so I don't want everybody to have access to it. If somebody were to accidentally get access to it, then they wouldn't get an IP address, so they wouldn't really have access to anything. Somebody would have to know what the IP address range of that network is, and then plug into it, be able to plug into it, and configure a static IP address on that network. So it makes it more difficult. So I don't have VLAN 10 set up with an IP address. Now, the other thing I have here is I have this server pool right here, VLAN 20. And so with it, I've excluded quite a big range. In fact, anything from .1 to .223. So this is another network that is a more protected network. And perhaps what I would do is not have a pool on here at all, not hand out DHCP addresses at all. I'm primarily going to use this VLAN with static IP addresses, and I wouldn't be configuring all of those devices with DHCP, most of them at least. And so I really don't need that many. The only reason why I would have a pool on a server VLAN is because I would possibly want to have it a little bit easier to set up new servers. I can turn up new servers, they get an IP address, and then I can use that IP address to manage them. So maybe just for the initial setup. So I'm going to act as if this is the initial setup, and I'm going to exclude most of the range, but just a little bit at the end there that I can utilize to set up my servers. All right, then I also have in each of these user network ranges, I have the first section of it is set aside for things that I statically want to assign. Like if I want a printer in that network, then I could statically assign that printer in that network. The last part of the range, I've got some set up so I can randomly choose something in there and statically assign it to a device, and I know it's going to be open. So just in case I need to do any troubleshooting or setting up of something, I have that range to do that. So that's usually what I set up. And then the last range here this is for the what will be the phone network. And I don't need to have as much statically assigned addresses in that phone network. And so I've opened it up just a little bit more. So that's my reasoning behind all of that. So what I'll do is I'm going to copy these excludes here, and I'll paste them into my network. And there they are. So those are now into my network. The next thing that I'm going to do is set up the pool. So in the pools, I've got the network address with the subnet mask. I got the default router for each one of those. The DNS server is going to be all the same for each one. I don't have a DNS server on my network yet, so it's just going to reference something out in public. I got my lease time set for a day and 12 hours, and then I've also got my domain name, andy.lan. Most of these configurations, with the exception of the network, the VLANs, the network, and the default route, most of the other settings are all the same. So let me go ahead and grab this first one. I'm going to copy that and paste it into here. Everything looks good, and I'll do it for the rest of these now as well. So copy and paste those all in there. All right. Then the last thing that I want to do is I'm going to exit out of here, and then I've got this IPv6 unicast-routing, and that's just for the IP version 6 part. So this is that command that will turn on our SLAAC. So our SLAAC, or it'll start sending out those router advertisements out there. So I've get that into switch 1, and those are configured. Now everything's set up. At this point in time, I would test to make sure everything is functioning correctly. Now, one option, I debated about the DHCP version 6 server on here, and to give away that additional options. The stuff that I would configure if I were to do that would be a DNS server, and it would be an IP version 6 DNS server, but I've already got a DNS server here for the IP version 4, so I could just use that one. So I really don't need that IP version 6 DNS server at this point. And so then I also look at the domain. I want to set the domain. Well, it's already set up through this DHCP pool. So if they get an IP version 4 address through DHCP, they've already set up these two items. I don't really need it. So there's nothing that I really need to configure with IP version 6 right now at this point in time, nothing that I would need a DHCP server for. So I'm going to hold off on doing that, and in the future, if I need it, then I can always add it at that point in time. But it's not really worthwhile for me to add that service at this point. So I'm all set up, I'm good to go. All I need to do now is test and verify that this is working. I don't have my demo laptop plugged into one of these other VLANs, but what I could do is I could just plug into one of these VLANs that has the pool assigned to it and test it out to make sure that it works.